Hello class, and welcome to our module number 8 video lecture. We're talking about media's impact on politics today. And this module is relatively brief, but there's a lot of important information that we're going to cover, focusing on our textbook, chapter 8, and also a very brief article written by Myers, 10 Most Reputable News Sources, which is, the link is posted for you on Canvas. So, to start, we want to outline a couple of basic types of media. So when we talk about media nowadays, we're actually talking about two types. A would be traditional media. And when you think of traditional media, that's newspapers, radio, television, that kind of network television, not cable television. So those are kind of the old school media sources that would fall under traditional media. And an important point to remember is that these forms of media are actually declining in importance, in part because of the second type of media, which is new media. And that would be any kind of digital content that you can think of. So that includes social media, but also, the websites that newspapers now have online. Most newspapers have an online presence right now. So any kind of digital media would be considered new media. And of course, new media is gaining in importance. So traditional is declining in importance, even while new media is becoming more and more important. More and more people are accessing it. Now, when we think about what we call our media landscape, there are a few key factors that we want to, some key terms that we need to understand. The first is polarization. And this refers to not only what's happening in our political realm, but also just kind of across the board. Polarization is a process where individuals' stances on a given issue or a policy, they're more likely to be strictly defined by their identification with a particular political party. So when individuals become more and more likely to identify strictly along the same lines as whatever party they identify with, that is considered to be polarization. Compare that with a more moderate perspective, wherein an individual might identify with one political party, but they may have several positions on different key issues that don't necessarily line up with their party. They might be kind of more moderate or more independent in some aspects. If the electorate is more polarized, it means more and more people are strictly aligning with every position that their party takes. That's their position as well. So polarization is an important part of our media landscape because media outlets are being created along polarized lines, and they're contributing to that polarization because of some of these additional factors that we'll talk about. So selective viewing is a phenomenon where an individual can tune in only to the news sources that they agree with. And you can imagine how selective viewing can contribute to polarization, because if you align with the views of your political party 100%, then you can now find news that only serves up the views of your political party. So selective viewing and polarization kind of go hand in hand. Another important factor of our media landscape is what we call media consolidation. And what this is, if you think of consolidation as the clumping together of something, media consolidation is just that. It's a process whereby progressively fewer and fewer individuals or fewer and fewer companies control more and more of the mass media. So I wanted to point your attention to the infographic that I have uploaded for you in Canvas. This is the media consolidation infographic. So as you can see, if you the title focuses on the fact that there are 6 corporations, and this was written in 2012, so things may be a bit different, probably even more consolidated. But these 6 corporations control 90% of the media in America. And then when you scroll up, you find that this useful visual is here showing the illusion of choice, where we have more and more, we'll have a few corporations that are actually controlling large numbers of the media. So 6 media giants control 90% of what we read, watch, or listen to. And then if you scroll down even further, there's just more information just comparing 1983, where there were 50 companies that own 90% of American media, and that's still a very small number to own 90% of the media. But then you go over to 2011 and that number has shrunk. The same 90% is now controlled by 6 companies. And again, this was written in 2012, so I'll have to get an updated version. But this shows you, it gives you a very clear visual of what media consolidation looks like. So I encourage you to review it just to make sure that you're clear on what it is and how it works. So media consolidation is just like just what the visual showed. It's a process whereby fewer and fewer individuals or corporations are owning more and more of the mass media. Media framing is another important phenomena. This is a practice that media have of shaping public perceptions of an issue. And the way they do that, they highlight some information and they omit other information. So if you think of a frame of a photograph and the way that if you, depending on where you put the frame, some things you can see, some things you won't see. So media framing is the same practice. They focus attention on specific aspects of a story or an issue. They offer a certain interpretation of event, but in doing that, they often leave out other facts that could kind of make us think differently about the issue or the event. So media framing is another important aspect. All 4 of these factors are important for contributing to our media landscape. So the impact on news coverage, those factors that we just talked about, they have an impact on how we experience the news and how we understand the news. So one important impact is that identical stories are now appearing in several newspapers around the country. And so if you think back to this media consolidation graphic, if these 6, or go up even further, if these select few businesses are reaching all of these people, then you can imagine that the stories that they churn out, if this one media giant is now controlling, is reaching hundreds of thousands of viewers, then they're going to make decisions about which kinds of stories they want to put out. And the same stories are going to be put out on all of their stations so that people across the country are going to get the same information. But it's exactly the same. It gives the same perspective, often in the very same words. This is a great example of what we're talking about. This is a recent video that was created by Deadspin. I encourage you to watch it at your leisure. But this is an illustration of the script that was given to all of the news outlets that are owned by Sinclair Media. All of the news outlets got the same script and they read it exactly. They read the exact same words and with the exact same tone. And so this video just shows the impact of media consolidation. Another important impact on news coverage is that news is often covered from an entertainment perspective now. You have fewer and fewer corporations that have a profit motive. They are driven by making money, and so that means that more and more often they are framing the news. Remember, framing. They're framing the news from an entertainment perspective so that they can get an audience and keep the audience. So this entertainment perspective has a very big impact on the way we consume our news and what we're being presented with. Now, an important recommendation, given those factors that we talked about and the impact that we're seeing, is to build the skill of critical media literacy. And what that is the ability to critically analyze relationships between media, between audiences, information, and power. So if we consider the fact that decisions are made to frame different news stories in a particular light, when we consider the fact that corporations have become more and more powerful in the sense that they are owning more and more media outlets, when we consider the number of people who are in the audience of these different media giants, when you put that all together, it creates, it's basically a skill that we as consumers have to build so that we understand all of those different factors. We know that decisions are being made to frame stories in a particular way. We understand which media giants are owning which stations and what spin they're putting on their stories, so that we know we can identify the angle or the agenda or the perspective that's being used in these stories. And of course, understanding not only the information that's being put out, but the fact that there is power being used. Power is being deployed in order to kind of make these decisions and influence, large segments of the population. So critical media literacy is an important recommendation for helping us to deal with some of those other factors that we talked about earlier. And then briefly, thinking about government regulation of the media. It is much weaker than it used to be, but just a couple things that you want to make note of. The Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, they are the body that is supposed to be responsible for regulating broadcast media. Any media that uses public airwaves is supposed to be regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. And another key factor to keep in mind is the FCC did have a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine, and it required broadcasters to present controversial issues in an honest and equal and balanced manner, which meant they had to, number one, be honest. Number two, they were not allowed to kind of insert their personal opinions. They had to kind of present the facts on all sides. However, it's also important to note that this fairness doctrine was overturned in 1987. So that contributes to kind of the state of affairs that we're dealing with now. So to wrap up, the Myers piece covers the 10 most reputable news sources. And one important quote from this article is that a true journalist isn't out to change your mind, but rather to tell you what's happening. So a few key recommendations that came out of the Myers piece, though, is that, number one, you should never read the news blindly. Even those reputable or reliable sources that Meyer is talking about here in this article. So starting from number 10 and working all the way down, the first recommendation is to never read the news blindly, even if they are on this list. You always need to read the news with a critical eye. So going back to that critical media literacy. And the second is that we should understand that because of the nature of political articles, we should always expect to see some amount of bias. And that is because politics is about values, distributing our values in the form of public policies. And since politics is about values, even if you're a journalist, you can't divorce yourself from your values. So even if you're trying to use high standards of journalism, according to this quote, not necessarily trying to change minds, but trying to tell folks what's happening, there is a certain amount of political bias that you can expect just because of what's being written about. So that wraps up our Module 8. Don't forget that your quiz number 2 is now open, and it will stay open until Sunday, October 14th. Also remember your participation number 2, where you post your reflection from your Take Action assignment, that is also due on October 14th. So don't forget, make sure you have these assignments turned in. I'm in the process of finishing up grading your quiz number 1s, and then I will work on grading your your Take Action assignment, so that we'll be ready for your quiz number 2 and your participation number 2. So please let me know if you have any questions, and best of luck on the quiz.